Hey, this is David Bason from Orphan, and you're listening to Godless Heathens.
Lightning. Fire. Power of God or something.
He died for our sins.
That shall be his undoing.
Hey, what is going on here?
Shocking. Positively shocking.
That's just funny. Fuck you.
I love it when a plan comes together.
Hey, come here. Hi. God damn it.
Okay, now, if by any chance I get, flustered, when I'm hurling through space, and pull the right one first.
Oh, well, then you're going to wind up looking like a well-done chili burger. They're going to have to shovel you into a coffin.
Find and fulfill your destiny.
You bastard. Drop dead!
Item 2 request.
You remember one thing. You screw up just this much, you'll be flying a cargo plane full of rubber dog shit out of Hong Kong. I'm Larry.
Fuck off, Larry.
Cool. Well, let's get rolling here. And
Let's do it.
So, real quick, how did War Orphan become a band?
Well, it was... So, Richie and Dante are in New York. I left New York 13 years ago now and moved to LA. And at the start of pandemic, they had a few songs, and we're just, real life friends. We hang out and talk all the time. Well, we hang out when I'm in New York, but we talk all the time. And they said, why don't you give a shot to barking on some of these? So we started, and we really enjoyed the process, and we just kept rolling, and we were doing, a song every, song every couple of weeks or something. So the first full-length album came together really quickly. And I've got a buddy out here in LA who has helped us produce both full lengths now, and I would just go over to his place, and it was really like a very typical kind of pandemic project, like hobby project.
Sure.
But it turned out so well that we just kept going. And now we've just, on February 17th, the second full length will be out. So it's really sort of, taken over our time.
Now, from a musical thing, are you from California, or are you actually from New York?
I'm from Canada.
Oh, Canada. Okay, even better. Even better.
Yeah, I moved to New York when I was 24, and I stayed there for quite a number of years, and then moved out here. I can't believe it. This is the year where I've been in LA as long as I was in New York.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
So, and then Barf Bag, do you still do that as well?
Well, War Orphan has kind of taken over, actually, but Barf Bag was also a pandemic project that I did with a couple friends. Brian, who plays in the Dresden Dolls, and Kenny, who used to play in AWOL Nation, and we all really like, political street punk. So we made a record again pretty quickly. But War Orphan has become the main focus, and we're just having so much fun with it. And I'll be traveling to New York in about a month, and we're gonna. Do you know Drew Stone and the New York Hardcore Chronicles show that he does?
I'm not familiar with that, no.
He all throughout pandemic, he did a weekly show that most of us tuned into and watched, and then there's a series of he does a live series as well, and so he asked us to play in New York April 2nd at our friend Jesse Mallon's bar, Berlin. And that's with an old California hardcore band called Channel 3, which I'm really excited about playing with.
Cool.
They rule. Yeah,
That's
I'm
awesome.
really excited about that. Yeah.
I grew up, listening to the Subhumans and the Dead Kennedys and Misfits and Ramones being less than the other stuff. I was more into like Black Flag and I was a skater kid growing up in the 80s and, was Circle Jerks and was into all that. So if you've ever seen the movie Thrashin', that was like, I was obsessed with that.
I rewatched it about 2 months ago.
I love it. I'm friends with Bob Russler, and I just love the movie. But a lot of those, the Dagger skaters were all like, Steve Stedham and Christian Hosoi, all these guys that I liked when I was growing up as a kid. So.
Oh yeah, well I live in LA, so I've been on the lookout for Eddie Radke for what seems like a decade. That was the first, pro model I ever rode.
That's awesome.
And to this day, it's my favorite shape. And he's my all-time favorite skater. And growing up, like the Alva team, they were rock stars, and they were so much cooler than you don't want to break your own scene into teams or anything, but they just resonated so deeply with me, and so much more than a lot of the other teams. I was 100% Alva, Skull Skates, Zorlak, like that.
Awesome.
That is my bread and butter.
You'll get a kick out of this. So my mom, I was like, I don't know, 13, 14 years old. She took me to an Alva demo in Florida, and it was Bill Danforth, and then Eddie, and then Steve Stedham. And they get out of this car, and they're literally sitting there. Ask my mom if my mom wants a hit of a joint. My mom's was a school teacher. And then they're just they sign my board, and I'm like this little, 14-year-old little hoodlum kid, but, basically pretty, conservative family, and I'm just kind of trying to do my own thing, and they were really nice. And I remember meeting all of them, and they're skating like this drainage ditch that was in Fort Lauderdale. Mm-hmm. And then they drove off smoking pot and eating pizza from Pizza Hut, it was just so random, and they're drinking beer and all this in front of me, and it was, because they had the Bones Brigade came there and stuff, and I liked them too. They brought them there, and they brought a bunch of the Santa Cruz skaters and the Sim skaters. I remember I met Kevin Staub there at the same thing. But it was funny because the Alva guys were just like what you would imagine them being.
Oh yeah.
BO, and they're wearing vests with no shirt. It was great. I mean, they were like the punk rock version of all the skaters, and I thought they were so cool. And it was neat.
The Team Alpha poster, I mean, that might as well have, they were rock stars.
They were. I mean, I thought they were just so cool. And of course, I was into all of that stuff as a kid, but, it was, I tried doing ramp skating. I was never much of a street skater. And we used to skate pools and stuff and all this other stuff down in Florida, but it wasn't like California. It was huge out there. It was where it came from and everything. And, I remember meeting some of those people. I remember when I met Lance Mountain. He was the weirdest guy. Of all the PAL skaters, he was the most... That guy is legitimately just bizarre. He's a strange guy. He was strange back then.
Oh, yeah. Even when you watch those movies, he's a weirdo, but awesomely weird.
Have you watched the speaking of him... And I'll tell you to watch it just for the other skaters in it. Have you watched the Tony Hawk thing on HBO Max?
Okay, so I grew up not liking Tony Hawk.
Oh no! Watch dude.
No, hold
yeah.
on. I'm telling you. I grew up not liking Tony Hawk, and I was like, who is this jock, golden boy, kind of ruining a perfectly good counterculture
Sure,
sport.
absolutely.
And then I watched that movie, and I love him. I totally misunderstood who he is as a person. I had the wrong impression of him. I called my friends after I watched the movie. I was like, wow, I misjudged that guy like my whole life. I think he's awesome, and I now am a huge fan.
The cameos, though, is what I was going to say is the best part of it. Like Lance Mountain, that guy's nuts. He's like, I'm going to do this till I die, and I'm sitting there going, I mean, it made me respect them even more, because Caballero was like the same way, like on that documentary. I was like, Jesus Christ, like I didn't know they still skated like that. I was like, God damn. Like, if I tried to do that now, I'd be in the ER,
Yeah, and if you were like, how much of, how bad does Dwayne Peters come off looking in that movie?
Yeah.
If you're on Team Punk Rock, you're by default going to be like somewhat skeptical and thinking that probably Dwayne Peters was, cooler than Tony Hawk, but it was actually totally the other way around.
And I thought that was cool where it shows Dwayne shift in the documentary,
Yeah, totally.
I thought that was really cool, and
yeah.
But you know what? I think I'm with you. I had the same impression of. I never had his decks,
No, I wouldn't be caught dead.
I'll tell you the PAL decks I had. I had a Lance Mountain, and I had a Tommy Guerrero.
Guerrero's rad.
And the Guerrero I broke because it was more of a street deck, and I didn't really. So the Lance Mountain deck with like the primitives running on it, like that was my deck. Mm-hmm. I had a blue one. Mm-hmm. And every time I would break it, I'd get in it. And then when they brought Mike Vallely on, I was like, fuck yeah. And I've liked him ever since then. I love the elephant deck. I love that deck. But I was more like you. Like, I remember, Lucero. I remember having his deck, that deck. And,
yeah, sure.
But I stayed, the only, like, I guess, real popular skater that I liked was Hosoi. And I'll defend that guy to this day, that I think he was very much punk rock. He was like a rock star,
totally.
That guy was fucking. And you've probably seen all the bullshit he got into and everything. It's like, I mean, he.
Yeah, but he started his own thing, and he skated skull skates. And listen, I see that guy around LA, and I say hello, and he is the nicest person.
I would shit if I met him.
Yeah.
I would die. I've just loved him because it's a childhood thing. I remember being like 12, 13, 14 years old and just thinking, God, I love these guys. And that's the funny thing, ever since I was a kid, I met him when I was a kid, but I've never ran into, any of these, like, I would love to chat with him on a podcast or, any of those guys, Steve Caballero, Lance Mann, I would love to talk to him because I just think they're cool. I always thought, like Gonzalez, that whole thing with him, the Gator guy, that's nuts. Have you ever read about all that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's fucking crazy. So people to say that these guys weren't, like what you were they were, it was like a subculture punk rock thing. I mean, we grew up with that. You try to tell people about it, they don't get it. They're like, what? I tell friends of mine that are younger, and they're like, what do you, it's like you just had to be there, like it was,
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, that's so cool that you see Hosoi out there. It's so awesome. I remember, it's stupid to tell you this, but I remember when I first got Facebook, I found him on there and sent him a thing. Of course, he's just like, I don't know you, and I'm not and I was just like, God damn, it crushed me, because I was just like, it would have been so cool if he had added me because it was funny. I had friends that were into like musicians and, movie stars or whatever, and I'm a big comic book collector, but man, all the shit I love was like, it wasn't real. Spider-Man's not real, Batman's not real. But I remember being like the skaters that I liked. It was crazy. And going to those demos was just, it was just something that I enjoyed doing. And it's so different. I remember they had all those skinny decks and all that. I wasn't interested in any of that stuff, and I just never.
Yeah.
Anyway, I went off a tangent on that, but yeah.
I love it. I love that shit.
Did you? As far as music, what were you into growing up, like punk-wise, that you listened to?
I was super, super into a lot of Canadian punk rock.
Okay. I am not familiar probably with...
Oh my gosh. I grew up on Doughboys.
Okay. I did not know they were Canadian. That's awesome.
Yeah. Asexuals, SNFU, No Means No. Those are all my heroes because they would come through town.
Right.
And, the great thing about, growing up in the punk rock scene is there really wasn't that much of a separation between the person on stage and you, and they would stick around and talk to you afterwards. And, you grow up in a certain scene and you get to know people a little bit. And, so Canada's, really, really big,
Sure.
it's enormously big, and especially when you're in the van and you're touring, it takes 24 hours to drive out of Ontario.
Right.
It's these big long stretches, but a lot of these bands, they would tour from east to west, because, some of them didn't want to or couldn't deal with the border issues. So you would get these bands doing Canadian tours where, a lot of times for American bands, the Canadian tour is they pop up to Vancouver, then they go down and they tour in the States, and then they pop up and they do Toronto and Montreal, and then dip down into New York. Well, when I was a kid, I wasn't living in any of those cities. I was living above North Dakota.
Right.
And in Saskatchewan. So, you and I are talking about skaters from when we were a kid. That seemed like a different world to me. They weren't at my disposal. I couldn't go and see a demo. Agnostic Front were guys on the back of a record who looked like they lived on another fucking planet.
Sure.
Because that was New York. That wasn't where I was from, or wasn't what I was doing, wasn't where I was living.
Right.
But who would come through every month or two, SNFU. Arguably the best live punk band of their time. And No Means No, who are these incredibly talented jazz players who happen to have an affinity for punk rock and banged out some just classic records. But those were the people at my disposal. All used to come through. Big Drill Car used to come through. Those guys really made a concerted effort to tour deep in Canada, and it paid dividends for them. They were those bands were like Led Zeppelin, where I was from.
Right.
But the staple of what I was exposed to were these Canadian bands touring Canada, and to this day they are my favorite.
Nice. Yeah, I guess it's generic, the stuff that I was into, but that's what I was exposed to. I remember, and it was all part of the skateboarding stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dead Kennedys, was Circle Jerks, all the stuff that I was into. It was all part of all of the stuff that I was into. And I'll tell you something else, as silly as this sounds, but I remember renting skate competitions in the 80s that were all these different mountainous regions out in California, all these different skate contests, and it would have all these different skaters from all these different companies that I love from the magazine, and I would rent it from this skate shop down in Sunrise, Florida. And I remember they would play music in it, and I would find out what the bands were, and then I would go buy it. That's the first time I heard Susie and the Banshees, and that's the first time that I heard what am I trying to think of? I can never think of the name of that band.
I did the same thing, do you remember there was like the, Mount Thrashmore
Yeah,
VHS?
absolutely.
Like all that. Yeah, like I totally would rent that. And then also you would get those Thrasher comps, like there was the rap music for rap people, but then all the Thrasher skate rock comps. I would get those and I would be like, what do you mean Cabs in a band?
Yep.
Well, I better get that, or who is DI? It was really,
I mean, it's funny because I was so into all of that stuff. And what was Cab's band?
The Faction.
That's it. That shit's great.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, it's totally great.
It's also impossible to find. I was trying looking for that. You're kidding me.
I think they played some cruise, one of those punk rock cruises a couple years ago.
That's incredible. Mm-hmm. That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's funny.
What I get a kick out of is, if you buy into punk rock really early, and then it sort of changes your DNA, right? Like once you see punk rock or hardcore or whatever, you can't really unsee it, and you can't unthink what you learned, right?
Right,
so
exactly.
You're kind of like a lifelong convert once you're in. But what's really fun is to watch all these people sort of become like elder statesmen and become part of a cultural lexicon. All these people have sort of graduated to become taken seriously for their contributions to culture.
Right.
That's a nice thing for all these people to be able to tap into when, like you were saying, in that Tony Hawk doc, Lance Mountain was saying, yeah, it hurts to skate now. It hurts. I'm old. I'm an old man, but I'm going to keep doing it. Well, it also, it hurts for these guys who aren't spring chickens anymore to get out and tour. But they have achieved a certain amount of, respect and reverence to be taken very seriously for what they did as young people. And it's got cultural weight to it, and that's you look at all the people who I would never have thought I'd be reading books by some of the people I'm reading books by.
Right.
Punk rockers are book worthy now.
That's true.
Great.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
I mean,
I couldn't be happier about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. There was I don't remember where I was watching. It's like with so many other things. It's funny because I can look back on all of that stuff from the 80s and I smile, where a lot of stuff that I was probably into at one or other point in times, I cringe, but that's one part of my life that I've always kind of just held on to it. I don't know. It's like I said, I would be like you were talking about Hosoi, I would be a deer in headlights if I saw him in a fucking gas station, and it would probably freak him out. But it's so surreal to me. It's like those people never existed. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
They were so larger than life to me as a kid. Even when I went to those demo things, it was still just like they didn't exist.
Yeah. And that's such a weird thing about living in Los Angeles. I don't know that I'll ever get used to it. I was walking out of a 7-Eleven and Tony Alva was in his pickup truck in the parking lot. I was like, I gave him a fists up, and he looked at me like I was crazy, and I just kept walking. I was just like, that's amazing. That's amazing. I don't know that I'll ever get used to it because, like I said, I grew up in a different country, in a different culture, in a different place where that stuff didn't exist. And, you know, my work and my life has brought me to LA, where these people, you know, walk down the street.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I relate to that too, because I'm telling you, like, my parents were very conservative. My mom ended up, they never got divorced, but she separated from my dad over a whole big debacle that involved me. But we ended up in Florida, and, you know, it was, it was my way out. The skateboarding and the punk music was my way out of their Christian shell that they tried raising me in and brainwashing me with, you know? Mm-hmm. And I don't resent them for that. It was something they were into, but it was, I thank skateboarding for getting, and punk rock for getting me out of that shell that my mom tried to, like magic shell, that chocolate shit they would pour on your ice cream and it would harden. It's like they were trying to do that to me as a kid, and I completely didn't, I just was never about any of that. I just wasn't. And I think skateboarding and the punk music for getting me out of that bubble they tried to, you know, because right now we wouldn't be having this conversation. I would be a fucking lawyer or a surgeon or a goddamn cop or some kind of, you know.
I mean, like, the town, so from the time I was 8 till the time I was 18, I lived, you know, in a small town in Saskatchewan. There's like a couple 100,000 people, right?
Right.
The next city was a 9-hour drive one way or a 6-hour drive the other way. So my parents knew that their time in that particular place was limited, so they were going to move back to the East Coast. But you know, you grow up in a certain scene, you got your friends that you play music with, you know, I had a girlfriend, I didn't want to leave, yada yada, but I couldn't figure out the escape route, like what you were just talking about, right?
Right.
So your friends are starting to go work in the factory, your friends are starting to try to go live in a different city, your friends are trying to, you know, some of them are, you know, making bad decisions with, you know, substances and using that as an escape. And all that stuff comes crashing down on you at a pretty young age, right? Like,
absolutely.
Life decisions get either made for you or you make them when you are in your teens, because there aren't that many options. So I was looking on the back of a big drill car record, and I saw the name of a guy who was from my town. And I was like, oh, you know, that's the escape route. Like, okay, how am I going to get out of here? Well, I will move east, and I will try to get into music. And it worked out for me. You know, it never works out the way you plan, and you know, you aim for one thing and it ends up being another. But music has absolutely been my escape route from what could have easily been like a super dead end, you know, existence simply based on geography. So I switched up the geography, and music took me to Toronto, and then it took me to New York, and then to LA, and it has supported me and my family for, you know, quite a long time. And that was like by seeing a dude's name in the credits on the back of a big drill car record, like that was super eye-opening. Like, oh, wait a sec, yeah, that could be me. That could be us. That could, you know, we can do things. It's not, you know, it's not these elevated gods. It's dudes. It's
right.
Dudes doing rad shit. So go do rad shit and something will work out. And that was pretty much, that's the extent of the plan.
I mean, I love the story of that. I mean, because I'm telling you, it's so relatable to me. And we were in two different, literally, parts of the planet, but I'm telling you, it was just, I remember specifically, and I never really thought about this till doing this with you today, talking about it, but it was my way out. I mean, skateboarding is what mentally got me ready for the rest of my life, like dealing with nonsense and just knowing, just having the attitude, fuck you, I don't want to do that, and just kind of like, I'm going to do my own thing. Like, I don't want to work at a factory or a cell phone store or a hospital. You know, I'm not knocking the people that do that. I just don't want to fucking do it.
It wasn't for me.
Yeah.
I know plenty of people who that provided a really good living for.
Absolutely.
And they were able to, put food on the table and it worked for them, but it was not my reality. I needed to get out. And I used to talk to my dad, and he's like, well, what are you going to do? Do you have a skill set? And I'm like, he's like, why don't you go to law school? And I'm like, because that's not my reality either.
Right.
So my reality was being in and around music. And like I said, like when I was in 7th grade, this kid and I used to go to the same record store, and he brought a record to school, and it was Agnostic Front, Cause for Alarm, and he was like, listen, I bought this because I liked the artwork on the cover.
Right.
I listened to it. This is not for me. I think you might like it better. And he gave it to me. He gave me that and a Crumbsuckers record.
Oh, cool.
And I looked on the back of the album and the photo, like I was like, Vinny Stigma. Holy shit, that guy looks tough.
Right.
Like, oh my God. And they're standing in front of like a burned out building in New York. Like, what the hell is that like? And now, fast forward all these years, and I'm playing in a New York hardcore band with Richie, who was in Sick of It All, and which
is awesome.
It just, I don't know. It's just, yeah, it's like things happen if you go out and do rad shit.
I 100% agree with you. I'm sorry we didn't talk as much about this album. I hope we can chat again sometime. This thing's about to hang up on me, but
thank you very much for the offer. It's very generous of you. Thanks for having me.
Cracker Jack timing, Wang. Total concentration. You ready, Jack? I was born ready.
Found me. I don't know how, but they found me. Run for it, Marty! Oh my God. They found me. I don't know how, but they found me. Run for it, Marty!
Doc, take us out.
Ready, good sir.
Not a tear to my eye. I'll be quiet.